And I am done with Joe Abercrombie's The Devils. This is an ARC ebook copy. This is the chapter I ended on, folks. It's Pride. It's 61% into the ebook. So you can see I made it past the halfway point. I really wanted to finish this book to give it a proper review, but I couldn't take it anymore. My eyes were bleeding. My mind was bleeding. I was done with this book. And I'm not going to give it an official review score. And I know the thumbnail has a 1 star, and that's a little bit in jest, of course, because Matt's fantasy book reviews inspired the thumbnail, of course, because he loved it. He gave it a 5 star. And so, Matt, if you ever watch this, I know you're a good sport. You're going to probably get a kick out of that thumbnail. But anyway, I'm going to make this a little bit more detailed than a normal quote unquote quitting video like I do in some novels that I don't finish, where I'm going to talk about characterization, plot, setting, the whole thing, to hopefully give you an idea, a really detailed idea as to why I did not enjoy this book and why you may not enjoy this book or why you may enjoy it. Before I begin, let's talk about Abercrombie a little bit, and I'm going to put chapter selections down below, so skip around if you don't want to hear this part. But Abercrombie, to me, he's one of my favorite fantasy novelists. I discovered him right when The Blade itself came out, way back in, 2010 or something like that. It might even be earlier. But I read it. It breathed new life into fantasy for me. So I've been reading fantasy ever since I can remember, and it was one of my favorite genres. I still enjoy it, but I feel like I don't know, my tastes have changed a little bit. But I am always on the lookout for a great fantasy novel. Like I said, breath of fresh air, doing a lot of things I wasn't seeing in the fantasy space. Just kind of characters that leapt off the page at you, prose that flowed beautifully, and it was gritty. It was grimdark, of course, as he is coined, Lord Grimdark. But so I was kind of getting tired though of his stuff. So I read all of the first Law books up until he released his young adult series, and I can't read young adult. I tried to read the first book, couldn't get into it. That's for another video. And then I read the first book in his final trilogy, still in the same world, but it felt off to me. So it felt like he was revisiting the same archetypes, the same character voices, maybe not the same plot, but it just felt samey to me. So while I gave that book an okay review, I thought it was above average, of course, it didn't convince me to continue on with the series. So when I heard about The Devils, this book we're going to talk about today, that it was taking place in a different world, it wasn't about the same characters. It was completely different, a new series, a new thing for Abercrombie. I was really hoping that this would be the book that he would kind of just rise again, like a phoenix from the ashes, and just reinvent himself to a degree. And then I read the description, and the description kind of caught me off guard because it mentioned a few things. Number one, it mentioned the setting, right? The setting is an alternate history Earth, so it takes place in the Middle Ages. But what really caught me off guard was the mention of a vampire, a werewolf, an elf. So this book that takes place in an alternate history Earth is arguably more fantasy than Joe Abercrombie's fantasy novels. But I said, you know what? I'm going to give it a shot. I'm going to give it a chance. I was still excited because I was, again, hoping that Abercrombie was reinventing himself. He was finding a new groove. He was getting his groove back. But let's start at the beginning. The first thing I saw was the cover. Check this cover out. Beautiful cover, evocative. It looks evil. It looks great. It looks very metal, right? So I was excited, and then I cracked open the book. I was so excited from NetGalley. I got an ARC copy. I started reading, and the first 2 chapters, the first 2 or 3 chapters actually, it felt like revisiting Abercrombie for the first time, or it felt like, not the first time, but it felt familiar, but kind of new, kind of fresh. It did his, what I like to call passing of the baton. So in chapter 1, you have a cursing monk. He's saying, God damn it, while he's being summoned to the church by the Pope. So I'm sure you can get the irony and the humor in that. And then something smashes on the top of his wagon. And then we cut to chapter 2, introduce a new character. That character is the one who was leaping off onto the wagon and off the wagon. So I was excited. Abercrombie's techniques were on the page, and this was a technique I believe he developed in the Heroes. And I've always respected him for it. It's always fascinated me, and it's inspired my own writing. All right, now I'm going to talk about the book in separate sections and topics. And let's start with setting first, because it's something I still have yet to figure out why he made this decision. because like I said, it takes place in an alternate history Earth, mostly in Southern Europe, at least in the 61% I read of this book. But there's elves, there's vampires, there's werewolves, there's, let's just say, more fantastical things than I ever witnessed in any of his other novels that took place in these made-up fantasy settings. So I had to ask myself, why? Why did he do this? Why is he injecting more fantastical tropes or elements into a novel that takes place on Earth, albeit an alternate history? I don't know. Maybe you in the comments who've read this entire thing, you can let me know down below if it makes sense to you. But the reason why I bring this up is every element in a novel, I believe, I hope anyway, authors think deeply about them. So generally when something is set in a historical setting, it's more than a historical setting. They're wrapping it around some kind of event or series of events and maybe taking a different take on it, kind of a what if scenario. Like, what if elves existed in the time of X, right? Or during this period, or during this uprising, or during this kingdom, or whatever it may be. That's what I thought was going to happen. I thought Abercrombie was going to take a historical event or a very pivotal moment in history or an interesting moment in history and inject fantastical elements into it, and then it would make sense. I would get the commentary. I would get the exploration. I never, ever got it. So that is an open question in my mind. If it comes together after 61%, please let me know in the comments below. All right, let's talk about characters next. And this is another big problem I had with the novel, not just in the execution or the presentation of these characters, but also the quantity of these characters. There are a lot of characters. There are 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, I have notes, 7 POV characters in this novel. And it's not like something like a George R. R. Martin thing where I guess more or less the POVs are somewhat evenly distributed. Correct me in the comments if I'm wrong, but it felt like there was really no rhyme or reason to the POV switches in this. Just whenever Abercrombie felt like it might or might not be necessary, I don't know. It didn't feel like there was a pattern. It didn't feel like there was really any kind of narrative obviousness to why he did so. But anyway, that's beside the point. So we have Brother Diaz the monk. We have Alex the street urchin, and also a princess. We have a Knight Templar. We have a werewolf. We have an elf, a magician / necromancer, and we have a pirate. And we have, sorry, I forgot. There's one more. I forgot to write it down. A vampire. Yes, we have a vampire in this. So that's a lot of characters. That's a lot of characters. And in the first 50% of this novel, all of these characters are together. Okay. Now, granted, I think it's maybe 2 or 3 chapters in when Brother Diaz, he's the first character we are introduced to. He meets up with the Pope and he gets introduced to these quote unquote devils. But for the bulk of the first half, they're together. Now you can see how that could be a little bit overwhelming. You have, it's like when you're in an elevator and there's far too many people in there. That's what reading this book felt like. It's just like, it's hard to balance that many characters in a scene. Now, I think that Abercrombie did the best he could, but I just don't feel like the quantity of characters is justified for this narrative. I would have definitely pruned a lot out of this to create a sleeker narrative, sleeker scene dynamics, and story dynamic. All right, the last thing I want to talk about, characters and my disappointment therein, is the way the characterization unfolds on the page. So most of the way we learn about these characters is through flashback. And I think flashback is fine as kind of a foundational element, but really you want to get to know these characters. You want to have them express themselves and grow and have you really learn the kind of person they are on the page, right? As it's unfolding before your eyes. And that just really doesn't happen here. Now, granted, there's a lot of jokes. There's a lot of not great humor in this, but there's a lot of humor in this across the board, pretty much with every single character. It's not like one of them is the comedian. They all seem to be comedians. But anyway, they do emote. They do have actions, but I never felt like their characters were effectively revealed through the scenes as we were reading this novel. Now, granted, maybe all of that happens after 61%, but I would argue that after 300 pages, man, you got to be doing this. You can't strictly rely on backstory. You need to be teasing out who these people are, why they're important, how their dynamics begin, how they begin to shift. But we don't get that, at least in the first 61%. So I felt like the characterization, while everybody here is unique, right? We have a vampire, we have an elf, we have a werewolf. They're different, but I wasn't feeling them on the page. I wasn't empathizing with them on the page. I didn't have any of those moments when, when Logan, Nine Fingers, and the Northmen were huddled around a campfire and having these conversations that really just gave them a history, right? You felt like they've existed for many, many years off the page before their story that you're reading right now develops. So let's move on to the plot, shall we? So Abercrombie has never been known for intricate plots, right? He's always really, the weight has been carried by the characterization. That's why a lot of people love his work. So this plot, it's not incredibly unique. It's pretty ordinary, and actually the plotting and the pacing gets incredibly repetitive while you read this book. So here's the premise. We have Brother Diaz, the monk. He is summoned to the Pope because she has a charge for him, a quest for him. And what is that quest? Well, that quest is to take the street urchin Alex, who is actually a princess, to assume her rightful spot on the throne of Troy. But Brother Diaz, being a simple monk, he can't do this alone. So the Pope has all of these quote-unquote devils, which are the elf, the werewolf, the vampire, etc., etc. I think you know where I'm going with this. And they are going to help him take her to Troy because, of course, it's a dangerous, dangerous road. So they begin this quest, and what happens over and over and over again, at least 3 times in the first 50% of the novel, is that they are attacked by jealous relatives. So she has all these cousins who want the throne as well. And so they're showing up with their small armies to stop her from making it to Troy. But it gets better, folks. It gets better. If you are a fan of furries, you're going to love this book. Oh, you're going to love it so much because there are goat people. There are bunny people. There are fish people. There are all kinds of animal people in this. And that was... that was my first, I think, what the fuck moment while I was reading this book. There's an altercation early in the novel, the first altercation, I should say, and there's kind of this giant goat beast. And I'm like, okay, well, you know, minotaurs, fantasy, whatever. But then there's a rabbit person. Yes, you heard me right. A rabbit person. A person with rabbit ears and little rabbit paws, a rabbit person. But then their next altercation with jealous relatives. It's on a ship. And it's pretty much that scene from, I can't remember which Pirates of the Caribbean movie it was. The Davy Jones one, where there's all the tentacle-faced, you know, shark people, etc., you know, basically mutants of the sea. That's exactly what happens in this book. And speaking of the humor in this book, this is one of the most cringe-inducing moments in this book when I felt like Abercrombie is going full-on cartoon, full-on comic book. It's when our adventuring party is on this ship and all these fish people are coming up to destroy them. One of the characters says, "I hate seafood." Yeah, I hate seafood. That is the level of humor you're dealing with in this book. There's nothing clever. There's nothing interesting. There's nothing that makes you laugh out loud, unless perhaps you find someone like Ryan Reynolds funny. But it all felt so thrown together, so juvenile, so just not Abercrombie. Yes, there's violence. Yes, there's blood. Yes, there's swearing. Yes, there's sex in this book, but it feels so childish on so many levels, so cartoonish on so many levels. And I really don't know what the hell he was thinking. It's a tonal mix. But if you like something like Deadpool, maybe you'll like this. If you like terrible humor mixed with violence, maybe this book is for you. So anyway, at the midpoint, this is when the party splits. So now the character development is a little bit more manageable because they're split off more or less in pairs. Of course, they come together again, but you'd think these would be moments where you get a lot of deep character development. You get this one-on-one time, and sure, there is some, but it just wasn't the depth I was hoping for. All right, let's talk about the writing itself, or as I like to call it, the cinematography of the novel. Abercrombie, I'd say this is probably the best thing about this book, okay? He's not doing anything incredibly interesting. He's using some of his tried and true techniques, which I enjoy, but not to their full potential. There's nothing wrong with the line-by-line work here, with the exception that the humor is not funny, with the exception that it's not doing a lot to reveal character, and it just doesn't have the kind of drive I'm used to. Well, that is it for me and this review of Joe Abercrombie's The Devils and why I just could not finish it. And I know a lot of you down there may be criticizing me about, well, it gets so much better after 61%. You know what I have to say to that? If after 300 pages of your story, it still hasn't come together, it's never going to come together. But come at me down in the comments or join my Discord server. It's completely free and you can tell me to my face. Thanks for watching. Thanks for hanging out with me, and I'll see you in the next one.